in my experience, when you ask people what power models they use in order to get people to do things for them, they far more frequently indicate that they use persuasive power models, such as speaking ability or experience or even seduction, rather than compulsive power models such as rank or position. In a sense, the reason for that is obvious. If you ask people about how they would personally feel if somebody else used compulsive power models such as rank on them, they would say that they would feel that the person was bullying them, that they were trying to force them to do something, that in a sense they were treating them a little bit as a little bit incapable. And as a result, they may not rebel, but they certainly would resist the person. And that resistance would eventually turn into malicious compliance. In a sense, the person's whole demeanor would be, I would do exactly what the boss asks me to do, and I hope it fails. However, when you consider this a little bit further, what becomes apparent is that this distinction between compulsive and persuasive power models is not as obvious as it would appear initially. For example, power models that people initially consider to be persuasive, such as speaking ability or experience, can be used in either a compulsive or a persuasive way. In the case of experience, for example, it is clear that you can use experience either to compel or persuade people. Let's assume I've got two people working for me. The one's called Tony and the other one's called Fred. And I'm experienced in a job that both of them have to do because I did that job in 1980. And let's assume I did it well. And I go to Tony and I said to Tony, Tony, in 1980 I did what you have to do now and what I did work. Don't argue with me. Go and do what I did. If that's how I approach Tony, he will clearly feel that I'm using my experience in a compulsive way. On the other hand, if I spoke to Fred and I said to him, listen, Fred, in 1980 I did the thing that you have to do now and what I did worked. It might be helpful to you. Take a look at it. He would certainly feel that I was being a lot more persuasive. Now, the question is, what's the difference between the two interactions? And initially, it would appear as if the difference between the two interactions is purely who makes the choice. In a sense, in the Tony interaction, he doesn't make a choice, I make the choice. In the Fred interaction, he makes the choice. So therefore, it would appear as if the difference between the Tony and the Fred interaction is purely just about compulsion or persuasion. However, if one were to go a little bit deeper in these two interactions and you do separate in your mind means and ends, and you would put into these two categories either the person who's doing the job or the job that's being done, there's a far more interesting distinction between these two interactions becomes apparent. If I say to Tony, Tony, in 1980 I did the thing that you have to do now and what I did worked. Don't argue with me, shut up and go and do what I did. It's clear that my end is the job. That's what I'm trying to achieve. And I'm using Tony or the person as my means whereby I'm getting the job done. However, in the Fred interaction, if we assume that I'm being completely honest with Fred, in other words, I mean what I say. And what I said was, Fred, in 1980 I did the thing that you have to do now and what I did worked. It may be helpful to take a look at it. Then clearly, I could have a completely different outcome from what I had in 1980. In fact, the outcome could be a complete catastrophe. So my end is not the job. In fact, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach Fred something. My end is the person. And what gives me the opportunity to teach him something is the job that he's doing. So the difference between the Tony and the Fred interaction is not just who's making the choice, or in a sense, how I'm either compelling or persuading them. At a deeper level, there's an inversion of means and ends. At a deeper level, I'm using, in the Tony interaction, I'm using him, I'm using the person as my means whereby I'm getting the job done. And in the Fred interaction, I'm using the job as an opportunity to teach Fred something. In other words, my end is the person, the growth of the person. It is this distinction that helps us to understand what the real key to the difference between these two interactions is. Because what becomes apparent is that the intent of the two are completely different. If one asked oneself, who does Tony experience as the beneficiary of the interaction, then clearly Tony experiences me as the beneficiary of the interaction. So his experience is that I'm trying to take something from him. If one asked Fred, who does Fred experience as the beneficiary of the interaction, he would clearly say that it was himself. He would feel that I was trying to give him something. Now, that's very interesting, of course, because when we started working, we defined leadership as achieving a result through people. And clearly, in that statement, the means is the person and the result is the end, which basically means to say that achieving a result through people is consistent with the Tony interaction. The intent is consistent with the Tony interaction. And in a sense, what we're saying up to this point is that most of us feel that if your intention is to achieve a result through people, it is better to persuade them rather than to compel them. And the question is that true? In a sense, the most persuasive power model that we described in the power models exercise is seduction. And very often people do use seduction in order to get people to do things for them. Now, let's say, for example, somebody came to you and was really nice to you and commented on your beautiful haircut and how particularly good you were at doing a job. And once they thought that they'd made enough of an investment in the emotional bank account, then said to you, please do for me what I want you to do. Generally, you feel that they're trying to manipulate you. And in fact, in most instances, there's a sense of two injuries here. Not only are you trying to get something out of me, but you're treating me like an idiot in the process. For most people, this is even more offensive than the pure sort of compulsive behavior, which suggests that if you are if you consider yourself to be in the relationship with somebody else in order to achieve a result through them, it's actually better to compel them than to persuade them, because at least you're being honest. The problem with persuasion is that there are two injuries. Not only are you trying to get something out of somebody, but you're actually treating them like an idiot in the process. So it suggests that we have a fundamental problem with our definition of leadership. If we say leadership is about achieving a result through people, then in fact it's better to compel than persuade, because at least you're being honest. So we conclude that if the leader's intention is to achieve a result through people, he can either do it by way of compulsion or persuasion. If he uses compulsive means to get people to do things, they will feel bullied and they will resist him over time. If he uses persuasive means to get people to do things, they will feel manipulated and they'll basically come out in conflict. This suggests that it doesn't matter whether the boss is compelling or persuading people. If his intention is to achieve a result through them, they'll only work for him because they have to, not because they want to.